Aaron. I'm a historian. Alan lets me in here every year. Your conversation about who pays and a private interest just brings up one important factor I don't see in part of the conversation, which is real estate and real estate speculation. Just, the interstate railroads, the transcontinental railroad, the interstate highway system were all directly or indirectly funded by real estate speculation. So I wondered, where are the real estate interests here? Who's going to make money off of it? And is that a challenge or an opportunity to some of these systems?
So I think it's a great question, and I agree with the answer. It needs to be private, but it needs to be actually a public-private partnership. Here's what Greenville's thinking about doing. I had a slide that dealt with this. The public brings right-of-way. We have road right-of-way, sewer, water right-of-way available now, and some of our solutions would use maybe an elevated portion of that, a grade separated solution, but that's the public in it to start with. We also need to bring a permitting that is permissible and somebody is predictable, that if we do this, this, and this, we will get a permit to do that. So that's public side. Then private brings money. They bring engineering skills, architectural skills to design a built environment that is important, like Shannon talked about. So, but they bring a solution that's attractive to the customers, and people are willing to pay for it. Poor people might have some subsidy, but wealthy people would certainly pay. Maybe everybody has a transportation card that they carry with them like a credit card. And maybe it's that system that you're talking about, Bern. But anyway, so it's public-private. And then on the back end, in Greenville, for example, we have the ability to do a TIF-type district, tax increment financing district, which would repay for some of the cost of putting in infrastructure that helps to create additional economic development. Additional economic development increases our tax base, which creates more property tax revenue, which a portion of which can be used to pay for the infrastructure. So that's a back-end payment, at least for partially, for the private investment. And again, the system has to work together longer term, operationally, fare box, payments of some type, individuals using it pay, advertisers pay, sponsorships for the stations and the vehicles. Our vehicles may very well look like stock cars. Everybody who wants an investment gets to put their logo on it. So that's my ideas.
Thank you.
Thanks. Curtis Hodge here from Local Motors again. So when we look at the kind of the business model and product model within our organization as we're trying to bring this vehicle to market, we like to differentiate it between the core product, which is the vehicle and systems that we're developing, and the whole product that we're actually trying to offer with the marketplace. And in order to actually bring this product to the marketplace, we're having to engage with a variety of stakeholders to do this whole product offering. So I think it mirrors the conversation that we're talking about, a systems level approach. And for us, just to list a few of the types of organizations we're working with that are part of the whole product for these solutions, everything from the operator to financing, insurance, legal, logistics, even how do you move these vehicles or transport a fully autonomous vehicle. That's a funny challenge we've had recently, putting it on a car transport truck to be deployed to a site. Most of the people have never used a tech like that before and aren't sure how to move it even. So there's a lot of barriers to bringing these products into the marketplace, and what we're trying to do is act in an open fashion to collaborate with these different stakeholders, whether it's an insurer, figuring out how to offer the insurance package for the vehicle, a financier, figuring out the amortization schedule for the hardware and software and systems on board. So overall, I think it's a kind of a challenge, and it's really going to involve a lot of cross collaboration and an open ecosystem to build the business model for this type of system.
Yeah, I just want to bring up something that nobody's really talked about. Well, it's been alluded to a little bit, but when we're talking about how we measure and performance and everything that we're talking about here, it's always on the operational side, and everybody forgets about the rider. And the fundamental objective of this thing has to be to delight the users, and you got to measure that and start measuring it. Because it was funny, because when Stan put up the graphic of Washington, D.C., I live in Washington, I ride Metro every single day, and the misery that is in that system is, among the ridership is just palpable. And the system is failing. But if you look at the measurements and the satisfaction and how efficient the system's running, and you can measure it all day long, but if you're not delighting the customers, the system's going to fail and people aren't going to use it, which I think is what Adriano was talking about in relative to who's going to pay for it, how they're going to pay for it. And if people aren't delighted, they're not going to use it, they're going to bitch about it, they're going to moan about it. And Bern's example too, I'm looking at that and I think that more is about how you impose policy that the operator wants to impose, not how you delight the riders. And I've just seen this model play out before. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or good or bad or that couldn't be incorporated into it, but I've seen the model play out before in trying to automate marketplaces. And you know, the .com era was littered with companies that tried to optimize that using applications that lost sight of the fact that the customer has to be delighted.
Thanks. I'm a regulatory economist as well as up in years, and so I'd like to share some memories from that field. I'm carrying a cell phone. I have telephone service at my house through the internet. I don't pay anything for long distance calls. When I was 30, I would have thought that was unimaginable. Bell Telephone had a monopoly on everything. Bell had a monopoly because they had a physical infrastructure that everybody thought was necessary for telecommunications. Then the technology changed. The technology changed in a way that long distance companies popped up as competitors, cell phones appeared. All of a sudden, their monopoly was unsustainable. But they did their damnedest through regulatory agencies and, if you like, institutional tricks, in particular, trying to subsidize competitive parts of their business through their captive ratepayers. I'm hearing an awful lot of that today, that the local transit agencies and their registered vendors are looking very hard for ways to create an infrastructure-heavy solution for the introduction of autonomous vehicles. And I don't think it's necessary. And I think it's potentially a technology revolution like the one that gave us our current fantastic telecommunications system, but we wouldn't have gotten that if Bell Telephone continued providing all the infrastructure for everything that was going to be hooked up to it.
So I think I understand what you're saying and I agree with it, but let me tell you, the infrastructure that we have now is not working. It cost us over $10 million a mile to build one lane of an interstate to widen it one more, and we don't have any more room to expand. We cannot solve our transportation problems by adding more lanes for ground-based vehicles. So our solution that we're very interested in implementing is an elevated routeway system. So that you do have to pay for that, but those systems can be automated to the point they're very efficient, they're very safe, they answer a lot of the questions, and they are of customer satisfaction. I agree with that point that Paul made. We got to consider the needs of the rider. And so what are people happy with? They're happy with cars. They love what they're doing. They don't like driving on congested roads. So if you can provide a riding experience that's like a car, but better, then people would be willing to pay as they're paying now for the cars, and they would get the satisfaction. So it needs to be comfortable, convenient. It needs to be on demand, not on somebody else's schedule, but when I want it, it's there pretty quickly. And it's comfortable. It's, Sam said in Houston, you got to have air conditioning, this kind of thing. So it needs to be electric. It's going to be ACEs, automated, connected, electric, shared. Uber, I was impressed with Uber and with Lyft, but let me tell you, to get from the Newark airport to here, to Princeton, Tuesday night, actually Wednesday morning, I had traffic delays in the airports. When I got to the airport at 1:30 or whatever a.m., It cost me $75 for Uber to get me here. Now, the good news is I got here in a very timely manner. The bad news is $75 is a lot of money for me, a good old boy from South Carolina. When I got an Uber ride to go 12 miles in Washington, D.C. several months ago, it was about $5. I mean, I couldn't believe. I thought they'd made a mistake here. But that's all they charged me. I don't know how that worked out. So it's a supply-demand system. Customer satisfaction is important.
Thanks. We got Shannon and then Paul.
I just want to mention the real estate issue. And are you still in the room? Where is he? He was here last year, our historian. Seemed like he just popped in and popped out. I think it might be interesting to start to think about real estate as not just on the ground. Okay? So start to think about this. What is real estate today? And what is real estate as you have these different types of systems? And they potentially are elevated and have to be elevated. And, how does that engage then? How do you engage? Like the one I showed going through a hotel. That hotel is real estate. It's an empty piece of land right now in San Jose. So I would suggest that might be an opportunity that we're not thinking of. And I wanted to say one thing to you, Sam, real quick while I have this. You don't have to put the handicap on the vehicle. Look at the example of Curitiba and how they solve getting people in wheelchairs onto their buses. They didn't address the vehicle. And in small little tiny stations, they put lifts. And so you get up and you're level then with entering the vehicle. That's not expensive. It's very simple. And you don't have to deal with all those challenges of the vehicle. Curitiba, okay?
Interesting.
Getting back to this whole customer delay thing, and Fred, I'm howling because I'm betting you used one of these to call that Uber, and it's not about. Oh, I'm getting a phone call. It's not about. I just contrast to what it was like in the friction world of taxi cabs before Uber and Lyft came on, and that delighting customer is all about getting rid of friction. And it's like you use the example of these phones, which are absolutely amazing, and even the progress that we made. I remember sitting in a bar when I was fresh out of grad school, watching a guy come in with a brick, and my buddy and I looked at each other and we're like, that's never going to take off at $1.25 a minute. And so we were wrong, obviously. But anyway, the bottom line is you got to remove friction from the experience, from the customer experience. It took a long time before mobile telephones removed enough friction that people took it out of the house, and cable TVs removing friction now, and Uber and Lyft are all about that frictionless experience for the consumer. And I just think we have to pay attention to that. The other thing I want to mention is I've got a video of the Easy Mile. I took an Easy Mile around the country last year, and we were in Omaha, Nebraska, and I've got a video of the ramp deploying and a woman getting on, and it's not, and I would also argue that, and I don't know what FTA, their level of enforcement and additional regulatory interpretation on top of the ADA. But if you read the ADA itself, it actually has quite a bit of flexibility in it. Now, I'm sure Federal Transit is interpreting it and has their own implementing regulation that is far more restrictive than what the law says, which is bloody typical of regulatory organizations. But I would just say that the law itself allows for some flexibility and interpretation. It's more about outcome than how.
Actually, this will be perfect because I'll bring the microphone right to Sam because his question is actually first to reflect. I'm Ken Pyle with Fioti, by the way. I've been kind of recording this and I'll be presenting something I think a little bit later. But to reflect on what Shannon said, the idea of building up, and that's why I'm curious, the air rights you have above these metro stations in this freeway within a freeway, has the city of Houston, have they been looking at using those air rights to build above the freeways and create kind of transit-oriented developments around there to monetize it?
Yes, of course they have. And Metro even now is looking at transit-oriented development opportunities on some of these major hubs. So it's a matter of when the opportunity makes sense to actually deploy. With regard to ADA, and I spent a lot of time looking at this in this TRB study, and if you're interested, I can give me your information. I'll send you the links where you can download the working papers and such. But yes, there also are options for lifts. What the challenge will be is when our goal is to have an automated system that doesn't require somebody there to push the wheelchair on or to monitor and make sure that it's on board. And of course, securement on the vehicle is a challenge as well. But the goal ultimately is full automation. So we have to consider those aspects and the new hazards that can be induced if a person is not properly on the lift and suddenly the lift starts to operate and the wheelchair falls off.
It works beautiful.
Well, then I'll talk to you about it. But
He was an architect who was a mayor for Chico when all this was in.
and I'm not saying there aren't solutions. I'm just saying the challenges are there, and somebody needs to bring the answers. But with regard to ADA and FTA's criteria for different heights of the vehicle above the platform where the person is located, there's different criteria for the angle. And when you get to 9 inches or above, as I recall, it's a 12-in-1 slope, which means that to go 9 inches up, you have to go 9 feet out. And that's the angle at which a typical or a provision for a person who is obviously weak in a wheelchair can wheel themselves up that ramp onto the vehicle. And those are the things that, yes, is that unreasonable? That's a topic that has to be addressed. And I've posed those very questions to FTA in their question and answer solicitation they had a few months ago. I said, give us answers for AV purposes on your interpretation of these criteria that you've set for different heights of the vehicle above the surface. And hopefully they'll come out with some answers.
Anything more? Okay.
So yeah, we've been looking at the ADA issue as well, just with our our shuttle at the test track, and Sam, I think so. And the regulations I looked at were specific for vans, ramps for vans. Okay, so you're looking at the same ones, and of course, so everyone understands, you factor in the curb as well. So it's from the curb to the door. So right. So we have a 6-inch curb. Is it 6, or maybe it's 5 inch, and then we have the door itself. But so we're using Easy Mile, which I think we saw a picture in your presentation. So based on our interpretation, as long as it's at our ADA accessible bus stops we built for the test track, then that particular ramp is compliant based on the weight and the slope. And so I mean you could have a system where as long as you have a 5-inch curb or higher ADA bus stops, that you can run these shuttles on that system.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. Can I just add one comment?
Yep.
15 seconds. Now, from a systems perspective, as we consider that type of application, which I agree, you can mitigate that angle by how high you make the platform that the person is on, the curb or whatever. Now we have to bring into the hazards analysis and the safety certification process the new issue of this device projecting out into the area where the wheelchair may be waiting or other people may be standing. And so there's a new hazard that's included. You have to be able to protect anyone standing there. Maybe they're blind and they don't see the ramp coming, or they're a child that crawls into the way. These are all new types of hazards that have to be addressed in an automated system, and those are all part and parcel to finding the answers. Okay, great. Now, the other thing is the vehicle has to be properly positioned in order to not have a gap, as FTA has defined, in the order of 1 inch to 1.5 inches between the vehicle threshold and wherever the edge of that lift is.
Steve Buckley again. I'm going to shift back to a comment you were making over here, and I'm a planner, so that's my background. I guess the one comment that gave me a little pause was you said follow the money. And follow the money means that these guys are investing what they speculate is the market. And I guess the challenge I would say there is, if that's the case, we're letting them drive the market, or they're going to create the market. And I guess the one piece is, are they going to do what we want them to do in terms of how they serve a city? And so I guess my concern with that is that, one, right now, we haven't articulated what it is we want. So what they're providing is what they think the public wants, or what they think is most profitable. And that may not necessarily be the right outcome that we want. And secondly, I'm not sure we're ever going to get agreement about what we want. Even in the US, Arizona is painting a very different picture of how they want to operate versus San Francisco or New York. So the one thing I think, to get the technology companies to produce what we want, we have to articulate what that vision is, and we have to give them the ground rules. And I don't think we've done that yet. And it's hard because it's messy and everything's fluid. But the big concern I have is that, and we're sort of mixing these, and I hear you about the automation piece. Right now what the cities are struggling with is ride hailing. Not ride sharing, it's ride hailing. And when you have automated, whenever that is, whether it's 3 or 10 or 15 years, that's going to increase. It's going to become cheaper. It's going to be more accessible. And I think that's the fear of how we manage that and how we make it serve people well.
Yes, I do agree. I have a background in planning myself, so I do understand the point, and I do believe that a city should never give up his role of planning and deciding what is acceptable, so to license what is acceptable and decide what is not. However, if what we are looking is somebody who actually invests not in the technology, because the technology investment has a huge leverage, which means that you create a technology today and you imagine to sell it for the next 10 years in huge numbers. So you invest a lot of money in technology because you expect to get a lot out of technology. What I mean that we need private money in service. And up to now, public transport service have been a terrible investment. So what we need to create are the conditions to actually be able to make public transport or new forms of transport investments profitable, which is something that never happened so far. So I know that I'm talking here about completely revolutionize the system, but still this is what we should get, because otherwise, if we just wait for the private car to become fully automated, then we will get this kind of services, but they will be completely deregulated. So the only way in which the city has, the only opportunity a city has to plan and to get this plan implemented is actually to find now somebody willing to invest to provide a service. Now, the idea of getting a profit out of the last mile service is ludicrous. There is no way you get a profit out of that. So the only way is to get an integrated service, which is last mile. It covers very well last mile, which is also very useful because it attracts a lot more riders for the longer journey. But then you need to allow them to get money out of the long journey as well, because otherwise there is no way in which this can actually get profitable. Today, we have some public transport companies which are capable of losing money even on long transport services, very crowded. So I don't know how it is possible, but they manage. I mean, in Rome we are specialists of this. So, but that is something that, of course, will need to be challenged, will need to be reorganized, etc. My doubt is we cannot entrust this entire new world and the revolution that this world needs to the same players that create the bad public transport before.
I'll just play the advocate for public transport because, as a lot of you know, I just wrote a book about automated transit, talk about planning, operation, and applications, which probably touch upon a lot of people because I covered, from PRT all the way to driverless metros. So from very small capacity or small vehicle all the way to large, which addresses actually quite a few points here since Adriano just finished his speech and he remembers, usually I was the one cutting him off, but I think I really in full support what he been talking about. If you look at the transit system, automated or not, so far around the world, only 2 systems with money. And the biggest and the most famous is the RTA in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong transit system, at least as an agency, they're profitable. But certainly if you have anything to do with transit, you know it's not your fare. Your fare box recovery, most probably 40%, 60%, the highest. But RTA doing so well because, you know, the ratio, I think the historian raised, like real estate. They own all the stations, surrounding areas, so they make a good amount of money, which was that, they said, oh, that's Hong Kong. That's, you know, high density, high population. We cannot do that. Maybe you could. Another experience I had actually quite recently, if you ever been to New York City recently, and especially as a tourist, you might have been to the Highland, which I was actually part of the team when PB got that project. They were actually working at the same time for the city, bidding on the Olympics for London. And that's why PB doesn't want to be the face. Back then, I just moved to the university, and PB asked me to be the face of this project. So we actually get really involved. In the beginning, when we look at the project, city was against it, totally against. I was working with the friend of Highlight, a private group, citizens, and we approached the railroad. But throughout the analysis, about a year or so, I clearly told the group, this is a very good project. When we start negotiating with the CSX, they're willing to donate the right of way and everything, just give the city ticket off, you know, our hands. I said, no, we want $2 million from you guys. So like, why? We already gave you right away everything. So like, because guess what? I took a hot potato off your hand. They are paying a liability insurance in the $1 million range. As you know, if you have a high-run railway in the city, something falling off, a piece of rock or a piece of, you know, your rail, is a high liability. They wanted to get this off. So it's quite possible you can leverage sort of different entities. The large part, you know, the reason I knew this information, of course, I had done some extensive study in terms of like the freight railroad and how you sort of reuse and apply sort of share use with passengers. And that's where we're looking at from transit system. You know, some I think Stan, quite a few probably reviewed my article, book. I actually have proposed the model, sort of working with the transit agency. May not be your, you know, 40, 60 people buses, but now you're actually looking almost like how do you transform the transit agency from large sort of just fixed route, fixed time operation into customer service. That's where we actually looking at maybe you're the third party operator. I actually named APT, Automated Personal Transit. Maybe you're actually using driverless cars or even PRTs, but you are supplying service rather than say we all buy our individual, you know, vehicle stuff, but you actually say New Jersey Transit own all the vehicles, but I'll purchase a fare or I'll hail a transit car because I don't own it. Anybody can use it. So that is a transit.
I just want to make a response about our country being so different. In California, they have voted to not even allow a building taller than 5 stories at any TODs. This is really strangling a lot of opportunity. Right, Ken? They just voted that, what, about 3-4 weeks ago? It's been fairly recent. Correct. And so looking at very dense situation, because I'm working with folks out in California with affordable housing, and in any kind of solution you're trying to navigate to do things is being, you know, you're being cut off at the knees because they want to keep their environment as they have it.
Just following up on your comment, I'm in the consulting business. I'm not going to name names. Spoken with 10 transit agencies. I think there's one of them that I've spoken to that actually gets this. And there is such a denial going on that this is actually happening. I think some of it is because a lot of the folks I'm dealing with, they're going to be retired in 5 years, and it'll be someone else's problem. The second piece, I think, is no one wants to broach the labor issue, and they don't want that to be an ongoing distraction, but they are not talking about this. And they're admitting to me they're not even talking about this behind closed doors. So to think that transit agencies are going to transform themselves and suddenly procure technology, maintain it, deliver it well, I'm a little skeptical of that. So I think where it comes in to a mixed model here of figuring out how they use private as the producers. They don't have to own stuff. They can be, the transit agency can be the provider or the organizer, but looking to private entities to be the producer of the technology. But again, just forewarning to everybody out here, transit agencies are literally, it was state DOTs are thinking about CV more than AV. Cities are worried more about AV. And then transit agencies aren't even, they're demonstrating with Mobileye. That's their big leap into technology right now.
So I'd like to challenge all of you in saying that, I am at a transit agency that is doing these things that you're all saying we're not doing. So in terms of addressing,
I said 10.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. So in addressing the labor force piece, so actually our CEO is the chair of APTA right now. APTA just had a workforce summit only about a month ago. Within our organization, we have what we call JTA University we just launched, which is the beginnings of us starting to train and transition our workforce into this future where more technology jobs are needed and fewer driving jobs are needed. And so in talking about what this future system looks like, we actually just drafted a document. It's our Smartly Integrated Vision Plan. And so what that is it's us talking about how we're going to strategically position ourselves within the shared mobility system as a transit system, focusing on our niche and how we can integrate with these other shared mobility modes and these private entities, and what that would look like in terms of public-private partnerships, and also, technologically what kind of app you would need, because really we think you would need an integrated app, realizing that the consumer, they don't want several apps. They don't want a JTA app. They don't want an Uber app. They don't want a Lyft app. And so we are working towards that. But these sorts of technology integrations and working at a public entity, it does take time. So right now we're just trying to position ourselves strategically to move in those directions over the next few years, and recognizing the benefits we can leverage with these new technologies in first and last mile, but also recognizing the advantage to a certain market segment and the cost effectiveness of a high capacity bus service. And I do want to hit on one point too, that in this room we're talking about this future technology. We're talking about using our smartphones to hail these services. But the reality is there's a population out there that traditionally transit serves and has always served. They're going to be slow adopters to technology. They don't have bank accounts. There's Title VI issues. Most of our fare box actually comes from cash. So we serve a specific market niche, and I don't think transit agencies are going anywhere for a long time.
Thanks. Okay, let's make this the last two, and then we'll wrap it up.
Good morning. My name is Ed Watt. I'm Director of Special Projects with the Amalgamated Transit Union that represents most of the people in the United States and Canada. But for 9 years, I was one of the top negotiators with the union in New York, and sat on the MTA board for 6 years. And just to explain the gentleman's insight into the MTA was that, and this is from the words of a chief negotiator, we have deficit service. WTF. Why would we want more service? Because more service equals more deficit. And they spend their time trying to plug budgets and skip between the elected officials that are supposedly, who've actually been isolated by these agencies in terms of accountability, but at some point are called upon to finance them.
Kind of last thought and question structurally, you mentioned the WMATA in DC. For the first 2 decades, it was the banner child for how to do it right. And structurally over the long term, they could not continually reinvest to keep it that way. The same thing with our road systems. You know, structurally over the long term, the innovation can come from public, but typically over the long term, you don't have the financial capacity to maintain. Speaking to the gentleman who regulators of Bell, is there some pattern? You mentioned we couldn't imagine 20 years ago that long distance is essentially free. We pay $50 a month and get all the data and conversation we want. At the same time, you know, 20 years from now, we're talking about a public mobility utility that is very low cost and you pay one price and you get all that you want. What would be the structural entity, a regulated utility, a quasi-public private like some of our turnpikes are, that somehow keep it regulated but give it enough freedom to move forward and to raise finances appropriately?
It's a very interesting question. My thought was that we don't need a regulated utility. We need a clear legal framework in which a variety of different types of service can be provided. And that's eventually what we got in telecom. There essentially is no regulated utility anymore nationwide in telecommunications because it simply became economically and technologically obsolete. And to me, as we look at level 5 autonomous vehicles being either personally owned or owned by the auto companies and made available in a variety of forms, we're looking at something that may or may not require a regulatory structure. When we focus ourselves on replacing putting things on fixed guideways as, with no driver, we're looking at a continuation of the current regulatory system. How we get to something in between, which might be getting rid of all the metro buses in Washington, stopping spending money on building new lines and deploying a variety of different sized, on-demand, local service buses. Is that something that needs a regulated utility to run it? Or is it something that could work as a number of autonomous vendors who essentially bid to provide, who engage in real-time bidding to provide a service? So it may be that there's some central software and communications that needed, but it seems to me that this could develop in so many ways that locking in a huge investment in infrastructure for autonomous vehicles may either put us into the wrong direction in a technology bifurcation or may end up being obsolete. And that's just a question about things that I admit I don't have a good way of foreseeing how it will turn out. But if we don't have a good way of seeing how it's going to turn out, then putting a whole lot of money now into brick and concrete and handicap ramps and all that may not be the wisest way to approach the problem.
All right, thanks everybody. Fascinating discussion, and I guess lunch is next.